Okay, let's assemble the central rod here. The instructions that they give you show a fully threaded rod, at least the ones that I have show a fully threaded rod. The new rods are not fully threaded. There's a little bit of a problem with that because this design, the old design, you could run the nuts down the rod a little bit to give you the correct amount of clearance to get the servos linked up. This new rod doesn't allow you to do that. So I did run into a problem when assembling the other kit that had the same problem. I had to assemble this a little bit differently than it said in the instructions. Hopefully they'll correct the instructions or provide maybe a little bit more thread on this rod so that you can do this. Because the bottom nut is, you can run it all the way up against the end of the threaded area. You don't need to do this lock nut anymore. So I took this as an opportunity to leave out one nut at the bottom and assemble it otherwise the way that they say to assemble it, which is large washer, bearing, yoke collar, bearing, large washer. Then I put the nut at the top, followed by another lock nut. I'm sorry, followed by a lock washer, followed by another lock nut. And the last lock washer will go on the top. What this does is it drops the whole assembly down about 1/8 of an inch, which should be enough clearance to hook up the linkages the way they need to be linked up. I'll show you how that works in a moment. Okay, a couple things about this assembly. One is that you want to make sure that the collar doesn't bind against the top washer. If it does bind against the top washer, you should take a pair of pliers and just bend these out enough so that they don't bind. And when you're doing that, make sure that they stay perfectly straight. These have got to be straight up and down, or else you get some weird interaction between the tilt and the nod functions. The other thing, you want this to be able to move around fairly easily, but you don't want it to be loose. If it's loose, you're going to get a wobble in the whole skull. So make sure it's relatively tight, but that it still will spin around. You noticed I tightened up this top lock washer a little bit between these two nuts. And this is not the way the original drawings said to do this. Again, I did this to provide a little bit of extra clearance between this top nut and these yoke controls, and I'll show you why when we go to hook up the servos. This section goes together pretty easily. I did trim a little bit of plastic off of the top of the spring. You can actually use this bottom nut, tighten it down if you need to. There you go. That spins around pretty easily. And that's what it looks like. And I'll hook up the servos in just a moment. Okay, I did make one small mistake when I was putting this thing together. I had originally put the longer adjustable high-tech servo horns on the nod and the tilt for these two servos. And as it turns out, there would not have been enough clearance for the linkages if I'd left those on. So the idea that the longer horns provide you with more, a little bit more motion is negated by the fact that the longer horns will probably eat up all the space between the control yoke and the servo horns. So I did go ahead and assemble the linkages. I ended up cutting about 1/4 of an inch off of the plastic linkages for each of these 2 linkages. I did, as I mentioned earlier, put the center support spindle together a little bit differently than they had said in the original instructions. And that was to provide a little bit more clearance between this yoke and the servo horns. You can see how little distance there is here. And we're going to try to gap that with these 2 control linkages. The plastic end goes on the plastic servo horn, the metal end goes on the metal yoke. Also, if you have a 1/16 inch drill bit or something that you can remount these holes with a little bit, you might want to do that for your servos, because the plastic links are very difficult to get in there. So let's go ahead and put this together real quick. Is that right? Yeah. The metal links are kind of a pain to work. What you want to try to do is prime open and get the post against the rod, against the control link. There we go. There's spring clips. Plastic ones are much easier to work with. Now, when I was used to do RC planes, these little guards, you can slide them down over the plastic yoke, the plastic clevis pin, so that it doesn't pop open, or you can just leave it where it is. If you find that that is popping open, you can slide it down. Have it. So you look at your mechanism. You have nod and tilt. And I'm going to throw this in a test rig, just like this, so that we can test it and make sure that everything works properly before trying to put it in the skull. And servos set up on a test rig. I do this to make sure that everything works properly before I get it into the skull. I'm using the Triaxial Skulls servo net product. It reduces all the wires coming out of the back of your skull to a Cat 5 cable, and a single power cable supports up to 8 servos. With the, there we go. I'm using the Monkey Basic Triaxial Skull product to test with. Very simple product to use. What you want to do is set it up with that product with the best guess for the servo limits. If you're new to this, I would suggest you set the servo limits very, very, very tight so that you don't get much movement. You don't want to break any of the servos. And then the idea here is to figure out where the center is, make sure your linkages look okay, make sure that when the head is level The servos are at about, the servo arms are at about 45 degrees. And then make sure that your jaw servo is moving in the correct direction and isn't binding. You want the plate to be level. You want to make sure that your nod and tilt are working the way you expect them to. You don't want to see any cross-linking between nod and tilt. That means you've got a bent rod somewhere or a problem with the yoke. And you want to make sure that everything works the way you are expecting it to. Really easy to do it now, really easy to fix now before you put the skull on, which is why I do this testing now. So this one looks like it's working really well. I've made a bunch of adjustments. I found the center for the servos, and now it's time to put on the skull.